My work is kind of about a language of utility, a sense of the made. I make work that hopefully is full of all the language of use and the language of labor. Reflecting upon utilitarian and functional objects without necessarily having to perform a utilitarian action. I think a chance to take work that's kind of challenging, big work that's kind of challenging spatially, and to have it in a space and have it in a context with other work so that it can kind of breathe a little bit and see how it holds up amongst other quality work and in a quality space. This turning out that this larger work of mine, the small work also, but the larger work is newer for me, and it seems like it's getting some legs, and it seems to be a nice launching point for this larger environmentally based work. Craft really owns the object, and what I mean by that is that it owns the tactile quality. It's not meant just to look at or to walk around and then walk away. It's meant to be touched and held. And even if you can't actually touch it because for reasons of a museum or a collection or whatever, it should make you want to touch it.
There are two pieces in the exhibition, basically the idea for both of them was to conflate post-minimal forms from the 60s and 70s with a sense of kind of political urgency or propaganda, something that on one level was about kind of sampling this kind of rich art historical moment and a moment in kind of craft history where textiles really emerged as a viable media to produce work, and brought it together with a kind of personal intimacy, or in a sense I think of these works as mirrors in some ways, so as kind of making the viewer complicit with the calls that or the text that it's producing. So they're kind of documents in that way as well.
Being an artist that was trained in the craft or the applied arts, I have a tendency to really love the process of making. And sometimes I'm guilty of that process actually overriding the concept or the meaning of the piece. Almost like overcooking. If you overprocess something, it can really kill the nuance or the beauty, the subtlety within that piece. So for the first piece I did was basically about process without giving the object. So writing an instructional text on how to make something without actually showing what was being made. And so that's kind of how I've started with the whole project. It's always my intention to try to bring people into the studio before the process gets too far ahead of itself, which is funny because I try to tell my students to do the same thing. In fact, trying to incorporate more working critiques within the semester has become much more important to me, and I'm guilty of not actually doing it for myself. The second piece with the melamine tea set, there were several different kind of tangents I was going to go off on, just thinking about that, and whether it was taking an object and overworking it so far that it actually became grotesque, kind of destroying the beauty in that through overworking, or taking an object that is really kind of inexpensive, mass-produced, kind of meaningless, doesn't have a lot of, I don't know, preciousness to it, and then pouring labor and process into that so that it becomes something that is very precious and meaningful, which I ended up doing with the latter, is taking a tea set that costs less than $10, plastic, and doing what I do really well in terms of taking a metal smithing technique on a plastic object, and all of a sudden its value has incredibly increased and just become something totally different, placed it in a totally different context, out of the home where anybody can handle this. It can go in the dishwasher, to the museum where now only special people get to touch it, and it's just much more elevated in terms of importance.